culture flowers, and in today's tutorial, it's all about getting started. What you do before your flowers arrive, what you do when your flowers arrive, how to process your flowers, all things flowers today. Okay, so getting started, we want to start even before our flowers arrive. So you want to start getting all of your supplies with Bloom Culture. When we send your proposal to you or when you purchase your package online, you'll get a list of recipes, and on that will be suggested supplies that you'll need, like floral tape, shears, buckets, so on and so forth. You'll also get our handy dandy DIY guide that tells you pretty much everything, probably even more than you want to know about DIY flowers. So first off, I'm going to talk about buckets. You can pretty much use anything that holds water, but rule of thumb is it's got to be long enough for the stem length of your flower. We've got buckets, like this. We've got small vases like this. You can even use anything that you find around your house. As long as it'll hold water, you're good to go. This would actually be really good for shorter stems like an anemone, a ranunculus, a tulip, something that just has a little bit of a shorter stem, as opposed to a hydrangea or roses, greenery, things like that. So larger buckets, these are professional buckets. Again, use whatever you have to hold water. If somebody in your family has any hardware store buckets, those are great. If you have trash cans, those are great too. So literally anything that's clean that can hold water. So the size of your bucket or the height of your bucket really correlates to the length of your stem. So roses clearly have a lot longer of a stem length than some other flowers. So you just want to make sure that the heads will be above the bucket line and above the water line, and that the buckets aren't overcrowded. We'll go through processing and then putting them in the bucket so you can see what I mean by overcrowding. Remember, the roses, all the flowers, they need room to bloom. Again, I'd like to note that we do have a bucket size guide on our DIY guide. You can either download that for free on our website, or when you become a Bloom Culture client, you get the full length version with, again, 52 plus pages of information about what to do and how to care for your flowers. Okay guys, before we start processing, it is super important to make sure that what you are cutting your floral stems and greenery with is something that looks like this. It's really important to have a proper shear or pruner with a curved blade, because that curved blade is going to give you a really crisp and clean cut. Some people think using really new or really sharp scissors is going to work, and they're not. They're just not for cutting flowers. They're for cutting paper, they're for cutting ribbon, something that's flat, something that's thin. That is definitely not a floral stem. If you use scissors, it can have a tendency to squash the inside or to just not give you a clean cut. And it's really important to have that clean cut so that the flower can hydrate, it can suck up all the water, all the nutrients that it needs to make it last long and make it look beautiful for your wedding or event. If you're receiving your flowers via FedEx overnight or via shipping, they're likely going to be in a larger box, also snugly fit in, and depending on the season, they'll have a lot of packaging or insulation around them, or they'll be packed with some ice. Again, there will be no water when you're shipping them, so they will look a little sleepy or a little tired when they arrive. Do not freak out, they are not dead. We just need to hydrate them and process them like I'm about to show you. Okay, let's start with our processing. The easiest thing to process, in my opinion, are roses. What you want to do when you receive your roses is they are going to have a couple layers of packaging on them. You'll see the plastic outer layer, and then you'll see the inner cardboard layer. Another thing that I would like to note is that most of the packaging, somewhere along the lines of the inside, you're going to be able to see the name of what it is. So you'll want to take that name and put just a piece of masking tape on your bucket and write the name of your flower. That way, when you're putting everything together, you're not having to answer the question a million times. Okay, well, which one's this rose, or what color is this, or what's that? It's just labeled right there. And when you're working through your recipes, you're like, oh, I need two, deep purple roses, and you can go and you can pluck those out. Okay, back to processing. So when you receive your roses, these are the only flowers that we suggest leaving in the cardboard packaging for a couple hours after you receive them. So what you'll want to do is you'll take your snips, just give a quick cut, and let's just rip this up the side. That's what I do anyway. Just rip that up the side. If you want to have a trash can next to you, that's super helpful, but I typically just throw stuff on the floor. You will have them bound at the base with a rubber band. Just go ahead and take that rubber band off. Also, watch out for thorns. These seem to be pretty free of thorns, which is helpful. There's also thorns, little tiny thorns that can get you on the leaves, so watch out for that. I like to take off all the leaves below the cardboard line. Oop, yep, there's one. So just be real careful. You don't have to be super gentle with this. It's okay to just kind of grab and pull. Place your hand on the cardboard box because sometimes the roses can slip out the bottom. But just continue to clean off all of these stems, all of these leaves. Get in the inner bits and bunches of that. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to get every single one super clean. We're just trying to make sure that whenever we put these stems in the water, that the water stays clean and clear of the leaves and debris. Clean water is also key to the longevity of your flowers. So there we go. The leaves have been cleaned off and we've got really nice clean stems. Okay, once you've got all of your leaves cleaned off the bottom of your stems, I want you to just grab the bunch, angle your shears, and give every stem in the bunch a snip at 45 degrees. And you'll want to go about 1.5 inches up the stem just so that we can steer clear of anything that might have dried up. I want to show you what it looks like from the blunt edge when you receive the flowers, and then what a clean cut looks like. So I'll do that here in a minute. So you'll grab the stems, go about 1.5 inches up the stem from the bottom and give it a snip at 45 degrees. And just do this quickly with all of them. You can just do a batch cut too. All right, you can see all of the angles of the stems, and what you want to do is just quickly place that in water. Let the edge of the cardboard rest on the edge of the bucket. Leave this cardboard sleeve on for about 2 hours so that you support the heads of the roses while they're hydrating. For this recipe, we have 2 types of roses, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly process these roses. All right, I'm going to do a quick cut at an angle again on these guys. Once I've given them a quick snip at the bottom at an angle, I'm going to go ahead and put these in the same bucket as my other roses, only for the first hydration of these when they've got their collars on. When we take the collars off, I'm going to separate them because we want the roses to have room to bloom. And once you take the collars off, you don't realize it, but there's 25 roses in here. And every single day they'll start to loosen up and their petal structure will open up more and more and more. And you want to give them room to do that. If you crowd them, they might, it might inhibit the opening of the rose. It might cause flowers to kind of smash up against one another and kind of make their petals a little chewy or undesirable. So once these are fully hydrated after 2 hours, I'll take their collars off. Okay, it has been 2 hours and these roses have been hydrating nicely in a nice cool room, no wind, not in direct sunlight, and they are ready to take their collars off. So what I do is I just grab them. They are stapled together. So you'll just pop these staples off like so. And then they will have some more packaging on the inside, probably some more cardboard. And then you'll see that they are stacked in a staggered manner to where there's 4 on top, 4 on bottom. So just gently unpack all of them. Again, they might look a little squished once you've opened them up. And then you might see some bruising on some of them, and that's okay. They have outer petals that are called guard petals that we will remove in the processing, and then you'll also tend to remove some while we are designing as well. Take all that packaging off. And then just give your rose a once over. You'll see that some of these guard petals look a little bruised, a little undesirable. This one might be a little brown at the edge. Sometimes I keep these on, especially in a rose that looks like this, because I love the variation of color to where we've got this beautiful bright color on the outside and it goes into this beautiful lavender color on the inside. So once these have had time to hydrate a little bit more, and when I'm designing is when I usually go off and take some of these petals off. Another thing too, what I was talking about, is that you'll see some of the petals are a little squished or a little bruised, and that's okay. When these start to open up, the petal structure will really make this flower bloom, and this one can just come right off. Once you've done that, you've cleaned up all of your blooms and you've taken all the excess guard petals off, go ahead and place them back into the water, and then you'll start to see them really open up in the next few days. See, this is totally normal, and you'll be able just to pop that right off. Again, the flowers look a little squished, and that's okay. They've been packaged pretty tightly, and now once we'll put them in the bucket, room temp, fresh water, they'll really start to open up. I wanted to give you a before and after. This is what the stem looks like, the bottom of the stem. It's got a really blunt cut on the bottom of it, and then what it looks like when we give it a nice snip. Very clean, nice snip. It's really a different color, a little bit lighter, and that angle helps it to where when you put it in the bucket, it doesn't sit flat on the bottom and not suck up the water. The tip sits on the bottom and the water is able to enter through that angled cut. Okay, so we've got all of our roses. I usually like to give each variety of rose their own bucket. When you have a larger bucket, I say no more than 50 roses to a large bucket. So these can share a bucket for right now. Typically with weddings and events, you might have more than a bunch to your recipes. So I'm just gonna let these guys hang out at room temp and hydrate until we're ready to use these in a design. Next up, we have our snapdragons. We love these linear blooms. In the DIY guide, we talk about different types of flowers in each recipe. This would be a linear flower or a line flower. Other examples of a linear or a line flower would be stock delphinium, larkspur, and other flowers that just have a really long stem, and the bloom goes along the stem in a line instead of in sprays or in one big bloom at the end of the stem. So these guys require a little bit more cleanup. And so when you take these out, they are going to look a little smashed because they've been bunched together. They might be a little bruised, and that's okay. They'll hydrate, they'll come to life a little bit more, they'll really plump up the blooms. And there's going to be some variation on the color. There might be a tad bruising on the blooms because they have been packaged so tightly together, but that doesn't mean that they're not able to be used. When you're designing with them, when they're around other blooms and mixed in, you're not going to be able to see some of the imperfections, but all the flowers have imperfections in some ways, but we're going to use them because they're still beautiful. Okay, with the snapdragons, you're going to want to take the plastic cover off. Don't just yank it because it's going to be smaller at the bottom than it is at the top and you'll damage your blooms. So be sure to cut this, to cut the plastic off. Next, you're going to want to unbind it at the bottom. You can either twist it off, or as I like to do for time, just snip that off. These are important to have a taller bucket so that they won't snap or bend at the stem, you'll want to gently just take your fingers and just run it down, and that will just strip off all of the unwanted greenery. And then give it a good snip. If you don't need it to be this long, typically you won't really need these to be extremely long. I would go about 2 inches up, give it a snip at the angle, and place it in your bucket. These have a little bit more of a hollow stem to them. They're not like a woody stem like the roses are, but again, just give those a quick clean off, a quick snip, and into the bucket of water quickly. You can do the cleaning all at once to just kind of get in a rhythm, or you can start an assembly line with your helpers to where one person does the cleaning and you put them in a pile, and then the next person grabs them, does a quick batch cut, and puts them in. Depending on how many helpers you have, how many blooms you have to process, that might be the way to go. These types of blooms specifically need the greenery off to keep the water clean. They have a tendency to just really muddy up the water. And you can see right here, if you get the stems pretty clean, there might be some residual leaves left behind. So you might need to take a few extra minutes to just really make sure that all of those little bits and pieces are off the stem so that we keep the water clean. Let's do a quick batch cut here. And in the water they go. Next, I'm going to move on to some Alstroemeria. These also have a fairly long stem length, and only because we aren't using a ton of the snapdragons for this purpose, I will process them and put them in this bucket too. Okay, with the Alstroemeria, you want to give the plastic a cut. Again, you never just want to yank it from one side or the other because you could damage your bloom. Just let it kind of rip open on its own. With these guys, they've got a pretty long stem length again, and I am going to do what I did to the snapdragons very similarly. Just go through and clean each stem pretty quickly. I'm going to give them a quick batch cut. I'm going to cut these a little shorter just because their length is so long, but you just want to make sure that the blooms are clear of the edge of the bucket. Give them a little bit of space to open up so that they don't smash together, and once you start processing these again, you'll see a lot of life come back into the blooms, and you'll really start to see the petal structures open up. Another one you'll see a lot in our recipes are carnations. They are extremely reliable. They've got really great color dependency, which means that if I order a specific color, when it comes in, I know that it's going to be that color. These variety are the Minerva variety, but we use all different kinds in most of our designs because not only are they affordable, they're just a really beautiful and hardy flower to work with. One thing to note about carnations is they have these little nodes along their stem that can make it a little tricky, as they can have a tendency to snap or break. So just be a little more gentle with the stems of the carnations as you are processing them and taking off these little leaves. The heads are pretty hardy, so I haven't really had any issues with them not doing well out of water or not blooming open, but just be careful with these little nodes along the stem. Okay, moving on to our wax flower. These typically just have one wrapping of plastic around them for protection. Just rip that off. Wax flower is a really woody stem and a really hardy flower. So it will be bound at the base. So again, take that off. So this one's a hard one to clean up a little bit. If you have a little bit of the leaves or the woody stems below the water line, that's typically okay. You'll just want to make sure that you change the water out frequently so it doesn't get too dirty or too muddled up. With these smaller kind of needle-like leaves, it can get a little messy. So I typically change out the water on wax flower pretty much daily. Just put a few inches. It doesn't need to be filled halfway full in your bucket, just a few inches. to where the stems are submerged will be just enough. It doesn't need to have water all the way up to here. So I give these a pretty shallow snip, again, still at an angle, about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch up their stem. These are really, really woody stems. So again, the shears are gonna be perfect for cutting them and not damaging them. I'm gonna go ahead and place them in here. I kind of fluff them a little bit or separate them out a little bit. If little blooms fall off, that is okay. You know, they're not going to be absolutely perfect, but once they start to hydrate, everything will perk up and look absolutely gorgeous. Next, I'm going to clean up some Hydrangeas. These are more of a delicate detail flower. Again, just take off the plastic on the outside. You don't want to just rip it off in fear of damaging your blooms. Take off the rubber band. And these don't really typically have a lot of cleaning to do. These are a little bit longer than I'm used to working with. So I usually have a smaller vase or a smaller bucket to put these in. I'm gonna cut their stem lengths down a little bit. I might need to get a larger vase, but like I said, these are a little bit longer than I'm used to working with, but they're absolutely gorgeous. Give them a little bit of a room to bloom. See how the vase isn't tall enough to really support them and they're having to really support the weight of the bloom. That means you'll want to come up a little bit higher with another vase or another bucket. So I'll go grab one. Okay, so something like this cylinder vase that's just a little bit taller than this plastic one will be perfect for those Hydrangeas. Okay, moving on to some of our specialty blooms. These are called Protea. These have a really, really thick and hardy leaf. So you'll have to manhandle them a little bit. So just clean up the stems. I think the common thread, regardless of what bloom you are processing, is to just make sure that the stems are free of debris, clean of all of their leaves, and that they are in at least 2 to 3 inches of water, and they have a really clean cut at the bottom of the stem. So I know that I didn't process ranunculus or peonies or whatever type of variety of flower, but the rule of thumb stays the same. Clean them up, give them room to bloom in the bucket, at least 2 to 3 inches in the bottom of the bucket of clean water. Keep them at room temperature, out of the sun, and if you're comfortable, they're going to be comfortable. If you do happen to need some troubleshooting, just email us and we'll be happy to help you revive or answer any questions you might have. But again, rule of thumb, keep them clean, get the stems clean, have a nice clean cut at the bottom in 2 to 3 inches of water in a nice spacious bucket. So with these Protea, again, just getting them cleaned off, giving them a nice snip, and then right in the water they go. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to Greenery. I've got a big wide bucket, but if you don't have one of these types of buckets that's a square, just use a bigger bucket that you have. A shallower bucket will work just fine, but if you need a taller one for some different greenery, such as the baby blue or the spiral eucalyptus, it'll all fit just the same. So just make sure that it's not overcrowded, and you should be fine. My rule of thumb is about 3 to 4 bunches of greenery per bucket. Greenery is a little bit different in that you can't really clean off the greenery because you need to use it for your designs. So they typically just come bound in a grower's bunch, and these fluctuate pretty regularly. Sometimes they're really big and full, sometimes they're a little bit smaller and more manageable. So we just have to kind of ebb and flow with the crop sizes and with the seasons and with weather. So not every bunch is going to look identical, and sometimes the color is going to be a little bit different. There's just going to be slight variations throughout the year, so you just kind of have to roll with that. But that's also the beauty of working with a natural product, is it's not the exact same every single time that you get it, but the same foundations of working with it are, so that makes it really easy. So with Greenery, you just take off like a little bit of the leaves at the bottom, but typically you might even just cut those off. But I just give that a little bit of a clean. Most greenery has a little bit of a thicker, woodier, hardier stem. So just give those a clean. I typically go about a 1/2 inch up. And again, with this, you're gonna need some shears. Scissors aren't gonna get through this. Give them a nice clean trim and right into the bucket they go. They are a little bit different than blooms as well. They're gonna have greenery sitting down in the bucket. With greenery, again, keep your water levels a little bit lower. You don't need to have them submerged in 6 inches of water. Again, it'll just make the water dirty. You'll need to change it out more frequently. Just give them at least 1 inch to 2 inches of clean, fresh water, and make sure at the end of each day that the water level is appropriate and clean, and they should be good to go. Moving on to our spiral eucalyptus. Again, these are gonna be bound in a grower's bunch. I just give that a nice snip and give these a good snip at the bottom. Spiral or baby blue eucalyptus can be a little bit tacky or a little bit sticky. So your hands are probably gonna smell like eucalyptus for a few days. So if you like the smell of eucalyptus, that's probably not a problem, but it can get a little bit strong, so you may want to wash your hands after that. But this is just a really clean and quick process for the greenery. Just give them a nice snip and go ahead and put them into the bucket. For this tutorial or for this process, we've only got 1 bunch of the gunite, 1 bunch of the spiral, and a few other bunches of different varieties of greenery. So I'm gonna place them in the same bucket. But when you're ordering for your wedding or event, and you might have, 3 or more of each variety depending on what you need. So I would just put 1 variety per bucket. Moving on, these are called lemon leaf or salal tips. These typically don't come packaged in water. If you walk into a floral cooler, they're bound like this and just kind of sitting in a box somewhere. They're typically packaged pretty flat, so when you get them, if they seem really flat, that's okay. These have a very wide variation to their stems and their stem length, so it might be a little hard to just give them 1 blunt cut. So you might just need to go to each stem and see where the bottom is and just give them about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch cut up the stem. And these are also pretty woody. So just go through and make sure that everything has a nice clean cut to it. These are really natural in that they're a little bit all over the place on the bottom, and that's okay. So go ahead and put these in the water. I kind of like to fluff them a little bit, and you'll see how much that bunch really can grow. It doesn't look like a big bunch, but these cover a ton of surface area. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that into our bucket. Next, we've got our leather leaf. This is a really hardy and popular variety. Covers a lot of surface area, really hardy in all your arrangements. This is a really generous grower's bunch. So you get a lot of bang for your buck. Again, these are packed pretty flat, but once you start to get into the bunch, there's a lot to work with there. So with these, it'll be a really easy kind of a batch cut at the bottom. Again, these are also not in the cooler with water, so they are a greenery that does fairly well out of water, but I just like to put them in water just to make sure that we've got the longest life out of them that we can. And this is going to be our bucket of greenery, but like I said, you can put multiple bunches of 1 specific variety per bucket. And last but not least, for our greenery, we are going to be using some of this Filmosis, which is also not packed in water. So you might not need to put it in water. It's very feathery and fluffy, for lack of a better term. I really love this greenery. It can be a little pokey, a little thorny, so just watch out for that. And again, once you really get into this, it's packed pretty flat, but there's a lot there in this grower's bunch, a lot to work with. This is a really unique and really, really fun greenery to work with. With this, I typically take off the rubber band. Sometimes you gotta snip it off, and give as best I can a batch cut. These are typically pretty short stems to work with. So if you don't get all of them, it should be okay, but just a pretty blunt, quick batch tip or batch cut at the bottom. Okay, and lastly for our flowers, I have some hydrangeas. These are hydrangeas that I've actually foraged and cut out of my own garden, but I did want to talk through how to appropriately cut these guys and how they come packaged. Typically, if you've got them shipped, they'll come with a small bag of water rubber banded to their bottom. So I typically just pull that off and give them a nice angled quick cut and right into water. Super, super quick into water. Hydrangeas love water. I typically don't even take their leaves off until their stem is in water. And then once their stem is in water, I just kind of pop these leaves off. And the reason you do that is because you want all of that water to go to the head of the hydrangeas. They need tons and tons of water and do not like to be out of water at all. One thing that you can do if you get them in and you put them in water and they're still looking a little sleepy or a little soft, you can submerge their heads in cool water for about 30 minutes and then pull them out and make sure that they're back in water again. So I like to clean off all of those leaves so that the water doesn't go to the leaves, it goes straight to the head. And again, these have a little bit more character to them since they're from my garden, but the ones that you typically receive wholesale are very straightforward in color unless you get some of the antique hydrangeas. I'm gonna give this one a quick snip at the bottom, get it back in water, and take off these unwanted leaves. I do love the colors of the leaves, but they're just a little droopy and chewy and not necessarily great for designing with. Okay, so we've processed all the flowers that we have for today. If we didn't go over a specific flower that is in one of your recipes, don't worry. Rule of thumb is to make sure that you have a clean stem free of leaves and debris. Make sure that you give it a clean cut at the bottom of the stem at an angle. Make sure that it goes into a bucket with room temp water in it and let it hydrate. Make sure that the blooms are above the bucket line. Make sure that there are no leaves or debris below the water line. And then also just make sure that your flowers in your greenery have room to bloom. Give them some space and don't overcrowd them. All of this information and so much more is in our DIY flower guide that you can find on our website. You can download a shortened version for free, or if you're a Bloom Culture client, you get the full 52-page version along with any package that you purchase or any consultation that you buy. All of that information and so much more can be found in the guides, along with supplies, how many people you're going to need to help you, a vase guide, a bucket guide, and so much more. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, or you can always email us at hello@bloomcultureflowers.com. And I'm Allison with bloomcultureflowers.com, and thank you so much for watching.